Hello, brothers and sisters of the interwebs, Steel Phoenix here, and this is going to be a tad different from the usual reviews because rather than a single game, I'm going to kind of review a group of games at the same time. I'm going to review the entire Red Faction series, that being Red Faction 1, 2, Guerrilla, and Armageddon, because last week I did a marathon on Twitch, that's twitch.tv/Nasu Amaya, where I ran through each one of them pretty much one after the other. The first two only took a single night. Guerrilla and Armageddon both took 2 nights each. And let's get into it. The first one, obviously, being Red Faction 1. It has a few quirks. You need, if you want to play it in modern resolution, need to get a patch for it. I don't remember the name of the patch. But you need to get a patch for it in order to run it in modern resolutions. And it has a couple other fixes with textures and whatnot. But aside from a few quirks from it, obviously the ending difficulty, and I played this on normal. It was a good game. There were a few quirks like having to save, autosave, or quick save. There was no autosave, so if you died, you had to go all the way back to a certain part or use consoles to get to a certain part. The only actual glitch that I ran into was one area where a certain character is meant to get to a certain point. That character died the moment that he got up an elevator. The game is meant to enter us a fail state where it actually gives a sort of alternate history ending compared to what it's supposed to have, but the game didn't enter that fail state like it was supposed to, and I auto-saved shortly afterward. So I had to spend a decent amount of time trying to figure out how to do it, and I in the end had to just restart from, use the console to restart from the checkpoint and give myself weapons, so I wasn't trying to do the entire end with a pistol. The only other complaint I really had about it was the railguns, which were instant kills and wound up leading to quite a few headaches at the end where I was running on 20 health the entire end. Final boss wasn't bad. The 2 bosses were a bit of a mixed bag. The first one was pretty awful until I figured out how to beat him by basically going through the door that your ally comes in through and cheesing him with the sniper rifle. The second boss was glitched out the first time, and the second time glitched out in the opposite way where she wouldn't fire instead, so wound up just floating around and was easy to kill. The game definitely is showing its age a bit, but it still looks pretty nice, and it's a concise story, has a nice feeling to it, and honestly, it puts Red Faction Guerrilla into quite a bit of context, which we'll get into later. The next one being Red Faction 2 was not a good game. I'm just going to outright say it. It wasn't a bad game. It was very average. Coming off of Red Faction 1, I'm expecting Red Faction 2 to be kind of similar. To a degree, it was. It was a very linear story where you can do things in whatever way you want, or you can go and sort of find other hidden caches and whatnot. But it had a very generic story. There's no point in me keeping from spoilers on this one. It's about as generic as you can get. The personalities that they give certain characters makes it very obvious that certain ones are going to wind up betraying you. After you kill the dictator, you're only about 3 hours in, so you're like, alright, well, that's definitely not the end of the game. And you get a cutscene where you return, and despite the fact that your character has no personality because he doesn't talk, he gets betrayed because he apparently supports the Red Faction wholeheartedly, and we're the bad guys, and we have to expand the game a bit more. So we can't possibly agree with this. And you get betrayed. I expected kind of everyone to betray you, but one person stays on your side. And later it turns out that another person actually was on your side too. The very obvious angry sniper lady that is an actual sadist and loves her job far too much obviously betrays you and has probably one of the worst boss fights that I've dealt with ever. Second worst in the game. We'll get into the actual worst one later. Second boss fights with a crazy heavy machine gunner who is also a sadist who likes to just activate his power randomly, and there's no real explanation as to what the power is aside from it being nanites, but it's a very evil lightning coursing through the veins look to it, so it's very obvious that the people that actually use this power are bad. It's even used to emphasize the commander's betrayal. In the middle of it, he slams his fist down and the lightning courses, and it's about as obvious as it gets. Speaking of the commander, he is the final boss fight, and his boss fight sucks. You're in a room with no cover, and he has a mech which has grenades, fire grenades, machine guns which are pretty easy to avoid because they at least don't pierce, and rockets. He fires the rockets a lot. You will take a lot of damage. And his vehicle can take multiple rockets. I fired about 3 volleys of rockets, and it still wasn't destroyed on easy, because I had to switch to easy because the game crashed. This game does not keep cutscenes in native. When it goes to cutscenes, it resizes and opens up a whole new thing in 360p. This caused the game to crash every single time that it did crash. It had about a 30% chance to crash the game whenever this happened. There, as far as I know, is no fix for this because of the way that it does it. I have no words. I had finally, after about 7 attempts, mind you, this is attempts of sitting through a 2-minute cutscene because the autosave is at the beginning of the cutscene. So you have to sit through a 2-minute cutscene that you then immediately get put into a battle with a mech. And at the end, after the mech, he has a railgun, which he has about a 80% chance of immediately firing and insta-killing you. That was not a fun boss fight. And it was probably one of the worst designed ones that I've done in a long time. Like, the first one, the first Red Faction, it makes sense for there to be a gauntlet and then for her to have a jet, because she's in a hangar that she flies around for the first part, and then to fly around with the nanites. That makes sense. Red Faction 2, you're in the top of a statue. The stairs are barely big enough to get you through, and there is no openings anywhere around the edge aside from the windows. There is no explanation for why there is a mech at the top of this tower. There is no explanation as to how it got there. There is no rhyme or reason for it to be there. It just is. For the boss fight, Long story short, it was a painfully average game that was severely dragged down because it felt like it went on longer than it should have, especially at the end. And by that I mean, don't make your autosaves before unskippable cutscenes, because that's stupid game design. And I was actually getting irritated by the end of it. Up until that point, it was just a boring average game. That actually was the tipping point to make me say that this was not a good game. I still overall consider it a average game that I could have played literally any other sci-fi shooter from the era, and probably gotten a better experience because it's around the same time that Time Splitters existed, and Time Splitters is such a good game. I might actually stream that one of these days if I can get my capture card set up. But I'm not spending any more time on this than I have. It would literally just be me complaining about this boss fight and several other choices that they made. The next one being Gorilla, which is the one that I was most excited for because it was the only one that I had any experience with. And I think that playing through Red Faction in sequence even sweetened it up a bit more, because I had the context of why we're up against the EDF because of Red Faction 1. A lot of the more plot twists as far as how certain groups exist make sense with Red Faction 1 existing, and it really added to the experience. So skip Red Faction 2, but play Red Faction 1 if you have the option to, before going into Guerrilla. It's a really, really adds to it. Guerrilla, I don't have any real complaints about. I had crashes, I think maybe 3 crashes through the entire game. Unfortunately, they were always in the middle of levels, like actual missions, so that kind of sucked, because one of them was at the final level. Luckily, I was able to quite quickly speedrun through it. The only other mission I have a complaint about, really, is the final mission of Dust, where you have to go and save people, because it's kind of randomized where stuff falls, and it's randomized around you. So the final person that, if you go in the similar order that I did, final person that you'll run into is someone on the second floor of a building, right next to the first floor of a building. There is a chance that while you're talking to the first person to get them to move, there is a chance that you can have a missile drop on top of the final person you're supposed to save, just as you are about to finish it. The way that I failed that mission the first time was I had a marauder that followed me up the stairs, and the person got stuck on the marauder, and I went to hit the marauder, and for some reason my aim locked onto the civilian instead. So I had to do that mission 4 more times because of that, because the rest of the times they were getting hit by rockets just as I was getting to them. That was the only real mission I have a complaint about. The driving side quests are kind of because they don't give you a whole lot of time, and your GPS will screw you over. But the game overall is fun, and it felt satisfying to finish it up. Felt very... There's a few points that you can kind of predict what's going to happen once you get to the mission, but it's a very complete feeling, very well put together game, aside from whatever winds up causing it to absolutely crash at certain points. I don't actually know what causes it. So next we're going on to Armageddon, which A lot of the complaints, I think, are because it went from the open world to a more linear story. It's a pretty solid game throughout. It's basically you're an exterminator instead of a rebel, because you release bugs and then you have to kill the bugs. It was alright. Up until the Queen. I had a bit more difficulty with it than most people do, because I decided that I was going to use the magnet gun the entire game. I had a lot of fun with the magnet gun, and I basically magnet gun and hammer the whole time. The only time that I used a different weapon was when I had to fight the Queen, because the only way to beat her is to shoot her weak points with a rocket. It kind of spoils the thing, because it removes an aspect of choice that a lot of the rest of it had. And the ending part is honestly where it's the biggest letdown. All throughout the rest of it, it's a solid game. The end is not good. Once you get past the first mech section at the end of the game, your girlfriend, I'm going to call her girlfriend, he says it's complicated. I guess it's not that complicated now, because after she's survived through 3 different towns that have been infested and everyone's been massacred, after she helps you with the Marauders, helps you get all the way down to the Queen's lair, effectively, she gets split through the chest by a tentacle and pulled down and away, and that's how she dies. It was the most anticlimactic death I had seen in the entire series. It's probably among the top anticlimactic deaths that I've seen in general. But you go through the thing. You gotta do a lot of tentacle clearing so that you can get to the Queen. You get to the Queen, you gotta do the rockets, and then, oh no, the Queen wasn't the only thing that was keeping them. Now you have to go up to the terraformer. And that is where the game decides to just kick you in the jaw. It's literally the first level, but with bugs instead of cultists. A lot more bugs. And at the end of said level, you repair the terraformer with your nanites that you've had since the beginning of the game. You got driven down into the underground because of storms, because the terraformer broke, was stopped, was EMP'd by a cultist. Spent 5 years down there. The entire event of this game could have been stopped by you going in afterward and repairing it with your nanites that have been known from the beginning to repair. The end of this game stretches on far longer than it should. It was a good game up until the Queen. The Queen was alright, and then the entire end segment seems very pointless and just used for padding. So, I still enjoyed the game. I might even wind up playing it again. The only red faction I will never touch again, most likely, is Red Faction 2. That game was bad. So, final ratings, putting them in order from top to bottom. My favorite one is Red Faction Guerrilla. I loved going around with the sledgehammer. I loved going through and doing a lot of these side missions, blowing stuff up, just having a ball with the destructibility of all these buildings. And it was a colossal amount of fun. And there's a few cheese points that are good because it allows you to get a tank without having to make it nearly unusable. It is a great game. Take the crashes into account, and I'd put this game 7.5, maybe 8 out of 10. It was a really solid game. Red Faction 1 is probably my second place on these. Again, very solid game. If the railguns weren't just hit scan to the degree where they only have to have the tip of their gun pointing around a corner in order for it to count, and a lot of the later enemies that will just chew through your armor in very tight corridors, I would probably even have this higher. Red Faction 1, I would probably give a 7. Yeah, probably a solid 7 out of 10. Red Faction Armageddon is in third place. Solid game until the end. There's a few other points that are kind of cheesed, but it doesn't get really bad until that ending stretch, where, again, it feels like it's just padding. I'd probably give this 6.5, maybe a 6, depending on how much I'm thinking on it. Red Faction 2. The gunplay is alright, I guess. A lot of the weapons feel very pointless. The sniper you get from the sniper boss is a worse version of the sniper that you already get. The grenade launcher you get from the grenade launcher boss is pointless. It's worse than both the other grenade launchers, the underslung grenade launcher and the grenade launcher that you have from the beginning of the game. It just wastes more ammo. It's very generic. Its age really shows, and unskippable cutscenes that are immediately after the checkpoints. The checkpoints are right before unskippable cutscenes in areas, always in areas where there's some sort of dirty trick that'll possibly immediately get you killed. I would probably, if I'm being generous, give this a 4 out of 10. Red Faction 2 was not good. I'd probably, if I was being honest, probably be closer to a 3 than a 4. So yeah, Red Faction 1 and Red Faction Guerrilla, definitely play. Red Faction Armageddon, you can play it. It's solid. Don't touch 2. And that's pretty much the long and short of it. Thank you all for watching. If you want to check out other stuff that's going on the completion project, stuff that won't actually make it here, because not all of it has a lot of impact or has any reason for me to do reviews on it, because people have already done them or done them better because they were mainstream games that are actually relatively recent. Like, I played Future Soldier the other day, and Badger did a video on it, and so I'm probably not going to do an actual review on it. But if you want to watch me do the completion project and keep up to date with that, then you can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Nasu Amaya. I'm attempting to get to 50 followers before my birthday, which is a week from now. And I am... If you would like to keep track of my art stuff, you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/NasuAmayaArts. That's pretty much the important stuff. Twitter has my card on the pinned tweet for other stuff if you want to follow that art stuff. But before I get to rambling too long, that is it for me. Thank you all so much for watching. Like if you liked, subscribe to become part of the Phoenix Brotherhood, and I shall see you in the next one. Bye.
And there he was.